Hey, welcome today. Bringing you another episode of Football Talk Squadron. I'm Pops.
And I'm Dutch.
Yeah, we're looking to do an episode here, kind of talk a little bit about what we see with divisions moving forward into next season. You know, some of their biggest issues, the positions that they really need to address, and you know how much cap space and some of the potential changes with coaches and between their coordinators and stuff like that. So. But before we get into that, we're going to go into a little bit of past and present. So with that, Dutch, where do you want to lead first?
Let's go past.
Okay. So I told you before we started this show, trying to keep it a little simpler than you giving me Keenan Allen when we're talking about the playoffs. But this guy, he was drafted in the first round, pick number 10. In the 2008 draft. So that's your big hint. Out of the University of Tennessee, drafted by the Patriots.
Jared Mayo.
Yeah, dude.
The linebacker that became the head coach.
Yeah, man. That was going to be the biggest hint. You know, we're going to discuss a little bit about the way that we see him moving with the franchise. So I thought he'd be a good choice. Just kind of talk about, I mean, he was a number 10 pick, you know, from the SEC, had a great career, you know, won a Super Bowl as a player and had some success as a coach. Now we'll get to see what he's like actually leading the program, if he's going to move away from the Belichick culture or kind of keep that in play, kind of like how Vrabel did in Tennessee for his tenure there. And we get to see how he is as a coach.
I mean, I'm going to have a lot to pile on to Mayo with how I think he's – I guess I can just say that now. In terms of how I think he handles it, I think he's going to have the disciplinary traits of Belichick, of like, do your job, you know, those things that he saw, the success as a player, I think he'll translate into a coach. I do think, however, for the Patriots, and especially him, he'll have to change the unfunness of being a Patriot, where guys, you know, they went up there because Brady was there, and I think that was a big piece of it, is they were able to pull free agents and get guys to play hard because it was like, hey, man, this is not going to be fun, but you get to play with Brady and win a Super Bowl. So it was this trade-off. And I think that him being a player understands that more of just sort of the dynamics, and he'll be able to translate pretty well, in my opinion. I think Kraft has the ability as an owner to give guys, a leash to let them run and make some decisions, and they're not under the gun to like, hey, if you don't win in the next 3 years, you're gone type of thing. So he seems to be a more disciplined owner in knowing that it's like, hey, I don't make football decisions. That's your job. You run with it. You did great as a player. You learned under Belichick. You got Super Bowl wins. You know what we want. Go for it. That'd be my take on him.
Yeah, and you know, I kind of see the same thing too. Unfortunately, the guy's going to have a lot of pressure already on his back coming in after Bill Belichick. Thankfully, you know, Bill had some tough seasons without Tom, you know, so hopefully that takes a little bit of pressure off and kind of hopefully has no, you know, nothing holding him back, no added stress to the job, and we'll see what happens. But now let's get into
I think it takes a huge amount of pressure. I think it takes, just before we get to the present, I do think it takes a huge amount. Like the difference of Belichick going out now compared to like Saban in college, like the idea at Bama is like, we're keeping this run. We haven't had a bad season. Like we were just in the CFP, like we're there. Like that to me is a totally different dynamic than following Belichick, where he's like just winning a Super Bowl or competing for a Super Bowl compared to what they finished this past year, 4-13. It was like, and they were lucky they got 4 wins.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
They were not a good football team. So I think that the floor is already set for the Pats. So I agree with you. Like hopefully a lot of that pressure is, relieved, and guys are just sort of like, hey, can't get any worse. So let's see what happens. But sorry, I had
That's
to
fair.
throw that in there.
No, completely valid. All right, let's move into the present. This guy's kind of been around the league for a little while, but keeping it in the AFC East. Where did Raheem Mostert go to school at?
Raheem Mostert. That was Purdue.
Yeah, Purdue. There you go.
If I remember right.
Yep. Nope. It was Purdue. Came into the league back in 2015. Kind of bounced around. Initially drafted by Miami. Spent a little time in Baltimore, Cleveland. Went to my Bears. Played a couple games for the Bears, and then obviously he found great success in San Francisco, which I think is what got him the contract down in Miami. Was what he showed what he could do with the Kyle Shanahan offense. So
I mean,
sweet,
he
man.
looked really good with the Dolphins. I think he broke that record for touchdowns in a season, rushing 18. I believe he had. The issue was for me with Mostert going into this upcoming season. I'll get into it a little bit with the Dolphins. Is there was such a clear dynamic break between him and Devon
And
A-Chain that
Yeah.
you sit back and you look at both of those, and dude, A-Chain can fly. Like Mostert was a good. It was like the tale of two backs. You usually have one that's like a speed guy, and one is like, hey, third and short. This is the guy that I want, and he was that for the Dolphins. The problem is I always feel like there's always someone a little bit cheaper that will run and get you a yard. And so it's hard to like keep a guy like that when it's like, I got to put so much into the cap for this guy, and we'll get into the Dolphins cap. It's tough. Like it's tough to hold on to these guys that even as good as they are and their big name and how good of a year they had last year, it's always this balance of like, can I find someone to do it cheaper? And the running back market is exactly that. It's that. Like, who can we get that makes this a lot cheaper to go do? But it's good. Here's your little side note. Let's see if you can get this one. Who is the other running back? Didn't necessarily play the position of running. He was not designated a running back that came out of Purdue, played unreal when we were younger. And a monster. Just an absolute monster of a running back. But it was really a fullback that came out of Purdue. And if you need a team, I'll give you his team. But the team will give it away.
Yeah, Mike
It was all stock.
Yeah.
I don't think many people knew he went to Purdue, which, I mean, he was a legendary. I can always run back some film of Mike Ostad just running through people, embodying, linebackers in the NFL. That dude looked like an offensive lineman, but had the speed of a modern day tailback. I mean, he was phenomenal. But little Purdue guy, had to throw him out. We don't talk about Mike Allstott enough.
Yeah, I was hoping that you were going to ask me who the quarterback was. Give me Drew Brees for 1,000, please.
Oh, the fact that Purdue doesn't have like 100-foot tall statue of Drew Brees outside of Purdue sort of like hurts my heart. It's just, I'm like real big, and like when you have a guy that is viewed as like one of the greatest ever, when I pull up to your university, that dude should be out there. That
100%.
he should be a prominent figure. Because that still blows me away with Jackson State. Like you go through and it's like, where's the huge Walter Payton statue? Like, let's be real. Like, this is the guy that he came from here. Like, this is one of the greatest. If many people consider him top 3 of the greatest running backs of all time, some people would argue one. Like, where's his statue, man? You almost feel like Jackson, Mississippi should be renamed Peyton, Mississippi. But that's just me. I love football too much.
I mean, that statue probably fell into one of the potholes down there in Jackson.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they can't get the water to run right, so they sure are not going to have enough common sense to build the correct statues. So that's Jackson, Mississippi for you. Taking shots at Jackson, Mississippi this morning. So outside of that, we're going to get into the AFC East today. That was sort of Pops' good lead-in questions. We talked about some of those guys that have played. What we're planning on doing is we'll cover each of the four teams. We'll talk about sort of how they finished this last year. A lot of you know how they finished. We'll talk about what they're losing this offseason, some of the needs that they have going into the offseason, where they're in the draft. And then I sort of alluded to it, and I do think it's like a really important topic, is understanding where they stand in the cap space. Because let's be honest, football is a business in the NFL. Business decisions are going to be made. How those are made is it's follow the money. Teams have either a little bit of money or not a lot of money or none at all. And you're about to find it out that two of these teams have absolutely nothing. So there's going to be major organizational changes made with two of these teams. But, Pops, I'll give you the honor. Which team you want to talk about first?
Man, I think the biggest one that I think is kind of easy in some regards because it seems like all the pieces were there. They just missed out on the fourth play of the season. I think we can roll into the Jets because they seem to have most of the pieces to the puzzle in place up there. We'll get into that. Let's go with the Jets first.
The Jets. So, the Jets finished 7-10, which at the beginning of the season, they would have told you was a failure. 4 plays into the season, they probably would have told you, well, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Because when Aaron Rodgers left, I've never watched a Monday Night Football game out of Damar Hamlin going down where the energy was just completely sucked out of a crowd. Like it was every Jets fan, like the pain that they've experienced since Namath won Super Bowl III was what you saw that night. It all for injury, and then it was sort of this like flirting of him coming back. Maybe he can work himself back. He was throwing balls like middle of the season, but they never really put themselves into a playoff position for him to get back. If I had to give a positive though for last season, it was the defense, which I'll let you sort of talk about. You're the defensive, Chicago Bears 85. I thought the Jets defense for most of the season kept them, in competitive games and really showed that with a quarterback, I think they'd be pretty good.
Yeah, and dude, we saw this last year, when Wilson was the main guy and then they started flirting with Flacco and I think Mike White, if I remember right, last season. They had the defense that they had this year. I mean, the pieces are there. It's showing that Saleh is, he learned how to call a defense. I mean, we saw it when he was with the 49ers, and ultimately that's what got him the job, leading New York. So I think the defense is still going to be every bit as dominant, but it's just like we saw from, the 2018 Bears, the first year we had Khalil Mack, to the 2019 Bears, that defense, besides injuries, the offense just was not doing anything. And so, you're going 3 and out. The defense is getting tired. They're not getting any breaks to sit on the sidelines. And I think that's a little bit of what we saw. They had to work a little bit harder. And so the fact that they're still 7-10, without great play from a quarterback, I should say, obviously not even close to the level that Aaron Rodgers would play. Not saying that he wouldn't have bad games, but for the defense to be on the field as much as they are, I think that's their biggest strong suit. And the biggest questions that we have is, are they going to be able to retain that form, now that they've lost another season, essentially that ended in disappointment.
Yeah, taking a look at who they're losing, sort of cap space, all the different offseason questions. So really, they lose their left tackle in DeJuan Brown. They lose a defensive end in Carl Lawson. The reason I say they're probably going to lose those guys is where they're sitting at the cap. So the Jets going into 2024 have only $5 million, a little less, $25,000 less than $5 million in cap space. I think a lot of that's going to be moved around, shaked out. Dudes are going to modify their deals. I can see Rodgers taking, breaks. Different guys are going to move money around for them to go be able to get free agents, especially if they go get someone that Rodgers wants, i.e. Devontae Adams.
Yeah.
If they're able to go get him, is money going to be moved around? For sure. for sure. Like, that's what's going to happen. I sit back. They have the number 10 overall pick in the draft. For me, outside looking in, the biggest question they had last year going into the draft, which they couldn't get fixed because Belichick traded away the pick to the Steelers, and Broderick Jones, the offensive tackle from Georgia, ended up getting drafted by Pittsburgh. The Jets are looking for an offensive tackle. They have to protect Rodgers. That's where I see them going, having $4 million in space. I sit back and go, I think that the Jets are going to do everything in their power to win the Super Bowl this year. Like, I think they go trade for Devontae Adams. I think at running back, you could see them go sign someone. I don't think it's going to be your Saquon or your Derrick Henry. I think both of those guys, or Josh Jacobs, all those guys want to get paid. They're coming off. Henry's coming off an actual deal, but Saquon and Jacobs are coming off, the 1-year franchise tags, which they ended up signing 1-year deals. They didn't play under the franchise tag, but they didn't get their big contract that they're looking for. I just sit back and I look at the defense. For the defense to play as well as they did, and like you said, you could tell the Jets defense was upset coming off the field. Like, they did what they needed to. They stopped guys. One of the games, here, AFC Championship game, they made Mahomes look bad.
Yeah.
And that offense could not get it figured out up in New York. I sit back and look at the Jets and say, I think the defense, like you said, will be good. It's about getting Aaron Rodgers help and helping him out. That's where I sit back and I go, that's where, for me, the Jets have to look to in this offseason.
Yeah, and, I was just looking, what was the biggest question mark on their defense? One of their safeties is up for a deal, but the biggest question is the guy in the middle, C.J. Mosley. He's a cap hit of $21 million next season. And, if they let him go, that would free up $17 million. They would only take a hit of $4 million. So the question there is that a guy that they're going to try to restructure? Because arguably he needs to be in the middle of that defense. Are they going to renegotiate with him, or is he going to walk because he knows his worth? I think playing with a guy like Rodgers, knowing that he's probably going to come back, I think it would be easy to stay and try to renegotiate a deal. But, at the end of the day, kind of like how we were talking about with lower potential guys, no offense, but, Zach Wilson, would you be willing to take less money, take a pay cut just to stay and play with Aaron Rodgers? It's kind of a looming question. I think in the running back position, as you were kind of talking about, I think Breece Hall's their guy. They've showed he's shown so much potential. Last year he was going to be Rookie of the Year, and then he snapped his ACL. So I think they've got their guy in Breece Hall, but I definitely think a number 2 running back will help them out because they struggled there. I think they let go of Carter, and obviously they let go of Dalvin Cook. So finding that number 2 guy to follow in behind Breece Hall is definitely going to be something that they might be able to pick up outside of a offensive lineman.
I mean, I'm not mad at the Dalvin Cook. I know the Carter thing was some internal team turmoil because guys really respected him. But it's, at the end of the day, like, I can't emphasize this enough. It's a business. Like, teams are going to make business decisions. I think that one of the biggest business decisions for me the Jets can make this year, you got to get rid of Zach Wilson. Like, I'm not saying you have to go sign the best, quarterback in the league for a backup, but like someone like Jacoby Brissett, someone that if anything happens to Rodgers, I'm not saying that you're still primed to win a Super Bowl, but I think the fans of New York would lose it if they have to watch Zach Wilson for another year. Like,
for sure.
I know he's on his rookie deal and he's cheap, but you got to figure out that backup QB position, of which this is sort of my prediction of sorts. I really think a guy they could go get who's still in his rookie year deal that's going to be cheap because the other team's going to want to get rid of him. And I know this is like heresy to say because he didn't play well, and it's like understanding the dynamics of sometimes switching a team. We see it with Baker this year, being able to sit behind a guy like Rodgers and learn is beneficial. Mac Jones for me is just someone, and I get it. Mac Jones has looked awful in games, awful. I just sit back and look at it and go, bring in a guy that's cheap, who's not Zach Wilson, someone on his rookie deal you can experiment with because the Patriots are going to be more than happy to offload him. They don't want him.
Yeah.
They're going to probably draft their next quarterback of the future, and they got Ben Zappe, and they'll keep Zappe in that backup position. Let Mac Jones sit behind Rodgers, and if anything happens, then it's sort of like, does he do better with this team? He didn't have the talent around him in New England. Let's see how it works out with the Jets. That's how I see them addressing their backup position. They're either going to go get someone like a Jacoby Brissett, super, old veteran, a Flacco, someone like that to balance that out, or go find a really, really young guy that just hasn't materialized in the league so far.
Yeah, I think obviously, you mentioned bringing in a guy like Flacco. We saw that experiment kind of fail on them last season, and I think that'd be a pretty weird dynamic between him and Rodgers if that was a contender that they were looking to bring in. That would be awkward dynamic, I think, just with the two competitors that they are. But yeah, man, remind me, did Mac Jones his first season was not with Bill O'Brien, was it? Or have they all been with Bill O'Brien?
No, it wasn't with Bill, because Bill O'Brien was
still at Alabama.
Bill O'Brien took over for the 2 years that Bryce Young was there as a starter, of which, like, sort of like, taking shots at the Cowboys. I'm always happy to take shots at Bill O'Brien. So Bill O'Brien somehow, I don't know how this dude scores jobs that I just want to know. Like, he's now the offensive coordinator of the Buckeyes. And I'm just like, yeah, how? How? This dude has probably one of the craziest stats that I've heard of. I sent it to you guys in that text message thread.
Oh, yeah.
That he spent 3 seasons with Bill Belichick, 2 with Nick Saban, 0 titles. Like, that's a stat. Like, of all the titles that those guys won, this guy couldn't figure it out there. And if you want to be mad he wasn't an offensive coordinator until the second time they got beat by the Giants in the Super Bowl. So he was there as an offensive assistant during the 2007 undefeated, regular season. Let's be honest, he really didn't have any hand in that. Like, it was just throw it to Randy, and Randy caught it. I sit back and look at it and go, Bill has proven consistently that he hasn't been able to coach an offense and win with a lot of talent. I think that was a huge regression. Bill made some really bad decisions. Matt Patricia, one of them. 100%. The Eagles found that out.
Yeah, and he's already gone.
Yeah. And I mean, I sit back and look at the fact that last year he had Bill O'Brien this past year, and then 2 seasons ago he had a defensive coordinator calling offensive plays. And we sit back and we're like, Mac Jones sucks. And I'm like, I wonder why. Like, coaches don't win games, but they're more than capable of losing games. They lost it for Mac Jones. Like, the damage from a young quarterback perspective, it's just like Baker in Cleveland. You got Hugh Jackson, Freddie Kitchens. Just every time this kid tried to turn around to, like, have some improvement, it wasn't there. Like, he showed that he was talented at Alabama. He made the throws when he needed to, and I know it was COVID, but man, they tore it up. Mm-hmm. Coming off, the only team that I've really ever heard compared to that 2019 LSU team and how dominant they were throughout the entire season, that's what that team was. Had a Heisman Trophy winner in Devontae Smith at wide receiver. Like, they had some plays. I just sit back and look at it, and man, I think that the last few years with the Patriots messed him up. Which, I mean, we can just. I feel like we covered the Jets. We can go right into the 4-13 Patriots and just sort of the bottom feeders that they were in the league. What was your take on the Pats?
Yeah, man. I mean, you're kind of already going after Bill O'Brien, so I'll continue to pile on. We just saw Mac Jones going after Bill O'Brien during games, and that should say a lot about the kind of relationship that you had. We've known it since Little League. You respect your coach. That's what it is. What coach says goes, and there just becomes a boiling point, especially uh, whether he was treating him like a little boy or whatever it may be. There comes a breaking point, and we definitely saw that this year between Bill and Mac. And there was a lot of questions. They're bringing in Bailey Zappi, interchangeably between Mac Jones, Mac Jones, and Zappi, not knowing who really is going to be the guy. And I think a lot of us thought they were going to give, I think, Malik Cunningham. Everybody's like, why don't we give this guy a chance? We already suck. Like, let's see what this guy has, because everybody thinks that he's going to be a runner type quarterback. Kind of the Cam Newton experiment, as you will, for the Patriots. And you're already out of the race for the playoffs. So let's see what this guy has. And we didn't see that out of the Pats. We still got the good defense that the Pats have. I think that's going to be something that Mayo already has working for him. Now it's just the biggest looming questions about what are we going to do on offense, because no longer can you have nobody playing receiver. I think they thought Kendrick Bourne was going to be their guy, and we all saw how that played out. Juju went through there. Like there was just a lot of question marks
Who's the other wide receiver that we heard about the news?
Your boy from your boy from LSU betting on all the games.
Butte, 8,900 bets.
I mean, the guy obviously had nothing going on, to make that many bets per day within a year. Good night. But yeah, they've got those questions to answer, and obviously it comes right back to who's going to be leading the offense, moving forward.
Yeah, for me, we talked about Mayo. You see what they're capable of there. Some of the guys are losing this offseason. They lose both of their tight ends, and Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. They lose their starting right tackle and Brown. He's a free agent. They lose Zeke. And the only reason I bring it up is I thought Zeke didn't have a bad year. I think it got overshadowed with the fact that the Pats were bad, but Zeke played well for how much you really thought he was going to be in the backup role. The Patriots, the good news for the Pats is where they fall in the cap space. The Pats have the fourth highest amount of cap space with $66 million going into the offseason. They get the number 3 overall pick. This is, for me, I know a lot of people have been like pushing this narrative of getting either Jalen Daniels or, Drake May. I'm still a big believer that Caleb Williams is the best quarterback prospect there.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't feel like any of the other quarterbacks are first round material. And I guess I can explain that real quick. When you watch Caleb Williams and his ability to throw, not just set, like what I like to call it is you're not pro day. Like when you're getting chased around the field, like he will be, because any of these teams that you go to, whether it's the Bears, the Commanders, the Pats, they have a ton of holes. Like you're going to be running for your life and you're going to have to make some throws moving. He does that. And when you watch his throws, I get Jaden Daniels won the Heisman, had 3 losses, wasn't able to beat Bama, wasn't able to beat Ole Miss, wasn't able to beat Florida State. He had moments where he put up some good stats, but in terms of like when you watched him, at no point was I was like, that's the guy I want to fight for to take with the number 1 overall pick. And I think too many teams get into this cycle of they're like, we got to have a quarterback. Let's go get one. For me, the Pats should be that team that goes so like they did when Brady left and they went and signed Cam Newton, where it's sort of like, hey, I don't like any of these guys. I think we can better. Like I sit back and go, if you put Marvin Harrison Jr. on that team, they're instantly better at the
Mm-hmm.
wide receiver position. They need a wide receiver, just like you talked about. They don't have one.
Yeah.
And for as many times as the Pats have missed at wide receiver, that's a lock of a wide receiver pick for them to go get your guy. Like, give the guys on your roster a chance. That's who I like sit back and look at. I know they're going to go quarterback because that's what teams do, especially a young coach who needs somebody. That's what I see. My big thing for the Pats is I just don't see them competing in the division next year. I think they have too many holes. Do you see any path that they could possibly, even win the division next year?
No. I mean, even to be, competitive, to be competitive here, they've got some things that they really need to address. You're already talking about, the quarterback position. I brought up the quarterback position is probably their biggest question mark going forward. Uh, if they don't get that guy, I agree. Obviously, Cam Newton experiment didn't go so well for them, but I think there could be some potential quarterbacks out there that they could pick up. Russ is out of a job, but I mean, he costs way too much money probably for what the Pats are willing to pay. But I think this gives Jared Mayo just the ability to kind of choose his own adventure about where he wants to take this team, especially from the offensive perspective. We've always known him as a defensive team. Uh, well, Bills always had a defensive team. Let me say that. Obviously, we know them for Tom Brady leading the offense, but you never had to worry about the offense because it was locked down by Tom. But now, ever since he's left, I mean, you can see when your offense is unable to move the ball, it doesn't matter who you have playing on the defensive side. Like, you're just going to be losing games because you can't score. And that's what it kind of comes down to. So, man, I don't know how they do it. I think what this offseason will show is what kind of coach Gerard Mayo is looking to be. Like, which way does he want to go? And how does he want to build this team? That's what I truly see. Is we sit back and we kind of read his moves and who he chooses in the draft and who he goes and pursues in the offseason and potentially brings back. I think we all would like a guy like Hunter Henry or Mike Gesicki, staying with the team because they are productive tight ends. Now, they didn't have a quarterback to throw to them this year, but those guys know how to play. Those are good, proven players in this league, who are worth the kind of money that the Patriots have to spend.
For sure. I mean, I the good thing for Mayo is, in my opinion, like I don't know this as fact. It's more just like I take a look at like the Panthers situation with Tepper as the owner compared to Kraft. Like I really do feel like Kraft is going to give his guy an opportunity to prove himself in less than 1 year, and be able to go out and have multiple drafts to figure it out. And if he doesn't want to take a quarterback because he's like, I just don't believe in these guys, he's not going to be under that pressure to make that pick. And it's like, hey, man, I know that we're going into this season and it's a total rebuild. And we're probably not going to be good because we still don't have a quarterback. I'm going to make the rest of the team better. I feel like Kraft fully supports that. Like, tell me your plan. I understand your plan. Let's go. Compared to Tepper, who's like, if we ain't winning a Super Bowl next year, I'm firing you halfway through the season. Like, the differences in those franchises why the Panthers have never won and why the Patriots, have six.
Yeah.
There's a clear difference there.
Yeah, and it's funny you
So,
bring that. It's funny you bring that exact example up of the Panthers. I was listening, to one of the shows out there that I tend to favor, and they were talking about how they just brought in the new GM, Dave Morgan, I think, to lead the Panthers, and then with the new head coach that was announced the other day, they're curious is this GM going to be able to tell Tepper to back off, or is Tepper still going to have weekly meetings with the coach, trying to put in his own gripes and complaints to try to change it week by week, versus just, hey, you hired me to run this team, back up. And I think
for sure.
that's what
I
we
mean,
didn't see. With Belichick and Kraft, obviously it hasn't worked out the last couple of seasons, but Kraft has shown that he's going to allow you to run the team.
in that value can't be understated. That, and I think the same of when you look at some of the successful teams. Like I sit back and look at the Ravens. Like since Brian Billick, Harbaugh's been the coach for 16 years. Mike Tomlin, 17 years, and they've only had 3 head coaches in the Super Bowl era with Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin. You have an organization that's committed to winning, but they're also committed that, like, hey, we're going to go through a process. We're going to hire our guy. We know who we want, and we're going to allow them to have time to find success. Like that, you can't underestimate that type of value in a team. The Pats have that with an owner in Robert Kraft. They'll be fine. Like, do I think that they're going to go back to the Tom days? No. Like, I was sitting back looking at teams that I was just going through head coaches because I'm planning on doing that whole, replacing greatness, as I like to call it, when you replace, a coach that's won a lot of national championships after, Belichick's done and Saban's done now. I know Belichick's still looking for a job. I don't think he's going to get one this year after the Falcons passed up on him. But for coaches who have won 3 or more titles in both professional and college, they have only one has ever been followed with someone who won a natty. And that was at USC in the 70s. Like, I just sit back and I'm like, this idea that the Patriots are just going to regain this like dynasty they had and win 6 more titles with Mayo, I would sit back and go, if you get one, be eternally grateful. It's incredibly difficult. I think the Pats, after and that's why I think that having these bad few years, they're sort of in this mode where it's like, hey, we understand it's going to take some time. It's not this like expectation season. I don't see that happening. So I think the Pats are in a good position to build. However, I don't think they're competing next year. That's just, I think you've already said you agree in that sense.
Yeah, and they're still waiting to find out who's going to be the GM of the team. I mean, they haven't even hired somebody that I haven't seen, that they've hired somebody. I know they had somebody internally, but it sounds like he's not the guy that they want, so there's going to be still some questions to address there because, I mean, Bill ran that team from front to back.
100%. Yeah. It'll be tough to replace, but, they'll get to it. So now that we know we got 2 teams that are in the positive in cap space, let's talk about 2 teams that are not the positive in the cap space. So do you want to go with the bottom feeders or the almost bottom feeders for the cap space?
Yeah, let's go all the way to the bottom.
Which is the team that had a few game lead with 5 games left to go in the season, and then blew it to the Bills at home, and then got pretty much ran out of the building in Arrowhead because I never saw an offensive line that I felt didn't want to be there more in a situation than the Dolphins when they were at Arrowhead. You could tell that they were just like, I don't want to be here. We're losing this game. I don't care. Get me on a flight to Cancun. The Dolphins are $51 million in the hole in the cap. The Bills are $43 million in the hole, so they're not far behind. I look at the Dolphins, 2 of their big names that I think are going to be tough to hold on to is Christian Wilkins, the defensive tackle for them, and then Hunt, the guard, the guy that I will say made the best play I've ever seen by an offensive lineman that didn't count when against Baltimore. He caught that screen pass and took off running and like leaned over the goal line and like got it in. And everyone was like, dude, I wish that Baltimore, out of like, I know it would never happen because it's, you're playing to win the game, had almost just been like, you know what, that was so impressive. We're going to deny the flag and let the score stand because of how incredible it was. For me, I said this after in text message. I'll give you my opinion here in a second, but here's my question to you for the Dolphins. Is Tua the guy?
Yeah, man. It's kind of crazy, because he's not showing up in the primetime games. The games when they need him down the stretch, playoff football, for instance. I understand that there was a wind chill of -30 in Kansas City, but you still got to play. I think there's a little bit of a negative perception going around with Tua. He's asking Mahomes for a jersey after the game, even though they just got blown out. Like, I can see both sides. That's just a thing that guys do nowadays. Hey, man, like, I want your jersey type deal. But also at the same time, like, I can see, hey, dude, you just got blown out in the playoffs after dropping, a 3-game lead of the AFC East. What are you doing? You're soft. Like, I can see both arguments if you want to go down that rabbit hole, whichever way. But at the end of the day, he put up career numbers this season: 4,600 yards, 29 touchdowns, and then as well as 69% completion percentage. So those are fantastic numbers coming from your quarterback. But that's all fine and dandy when you're playing in the regular season, against the Broncos at the beginning of the season, who had no idea who they were, and you put up 70 on them. That's uh, you don't want to become the Cowboys. You have all this talent, but you have the inability to show up in the games that matter and lose. And so Mike McDaniel, I do believe, is their guy, but he has to be able to play in those primetime games and make better play calls. Um, I would stick with Tua. And the reason being, I don't see a better option right now. However, it is funny that he's in the final year of his contract without getting an extension yet. So it'd be quite. I'm quite curious to see how they move around the cap to try to get to a little bit of money to try to keep him on the team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the cap's going to play a huge piece with the Dolphins. I will echo your sentiment with Tua of he's your guy right now. If you were sitting in a position where I think they could go back in time and give Herbert the chance, I think they go Herbert. You know, if you were to sit back and go, if you put Mahomes on the, and that's sort of like my big take is like, if you put Mahomes on the Dolphins, is anyone beating the Dolphins? And I'm like, no,
No.
like there's way too much talent on this team to play as poorly as they have. I sit back and look at that playoff game and really down the stretch, like this is my biggest question because now that they cut Vic Fangio, which it's one of these things where you can sit back and be like, yeah, the defense didn't perform. And I'm like, dude, they lost both defensive ends to injuries. They had linebackers. They were literally playing the Kansas City Chiefs with guys that had been on the roster for less than a week. Like, as a defensive coordinator, I sort of want to go, what did you expect? Like,
Yeah.
if you literally just went to Home Depot and picked out some wood and said, build me a house, like, I can't, I can only do as much as you're willing to give me. And I get injuries they are the ultimate X factor, and you just can't predict them. You have no idea how they're going to affect the outcome of things. It's usually for the negative. We've already talked about the Jets and Rodgers' injury. It for sure caught up to the Dolphins, and it caught up to the very next team in the Bills, and we'll get to that here in a second. I sit back and look at the Dolphins, and I'm in the same boat going back to the Tua argument. I think there's far worse options that you could have at the position on quarterback. He's done enough to keep there. Their big issue is I do think that they're going to have to not pay him this year. They're going to have to restructure a lot of different money. A lot of pieces on that roster are going to change. The other guy they got to pay is Jalen Waddle. Like, you have other guys on this roster that they're going to have to get paid. You bring over Jalen Ramsey. Was he good? Yes. Was he the best for the money? I don't know. Like, that's the tough part. It's one of these ones where it's like, I get that the guy that they could have had sit behind Ramsey was far worse, but for the money, you don't know. For me, the offseason for the Dolphins, I really do think you got to fix that line. Like, the line still wasn't amazing, especially when it came to the run. That was the thing that really surprised me
Mm-hmm.
against Kansas City. Like you had Raheem Mostert, like you had these guys that had this type of production, and in that game they could not establish a running to save their life, and it showed up big time when the game really mattered, against Kansas City. And then the second part's the defense. They sit back at the number 24 overall pick in the draft, and this is sort of an undervalued thing. Do you remember what happened last year with their first overall pick, or their first round pick last year? Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
They had it taken away from him after the whole
Oh, with the Brian
tanking.
Flores?
So
Yeah.
yeah, so they lost their first round pick last year, which for
Mm-hmm.
me is it's huge. Like that is a guy that you want to take. Like you had to wait another 32 picks almost before you got a draft pick. The talent exponentially decreases as you go through it. And don't get me wrong, there's gems out there. Tom Brady went late. Like so did Favre. There's a lot of guys. Though you got a guy sitting there at Mr. Irrelevant
Yeah,
playing for
Brock
an
Purdy.
NFC championship this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
There's guys there given the right situation. I look at the Dolphins sitting at 24. I think they're in a good position to pick up, a guard who they're losing and probably Hunt, maybe a defensive tackle. They're going to be able to shore up that defense. Getting, in my opinion, their biggest thing now that they let Vic Fangio go, like under Brian Flores, they had a good defense. Like they were playing good defensive football. They got to be able to find a defensive coordinator to help balance out the fact of how explosive that offense is.
Yeah, some of the names that I see that the league's flirting around with for the Dolphins is Brandon Staley coming back and just calling the defense. Also, Wink Martindale's out of a job. So those are kind of the two names that I've heard on the internet as being tagged to the potential vacancy there. And I mean, you thought Fangio, obviously he didn't get the job done in Denver when he left the Bears. But you look back to the greatness he had with Chicago, with Khalil Mack and some of those guys moving into Denver. It was kind of that stair step that you see all these coordinators have. Hey, this defense is the number one defense, or at least top 10. I would say you could bet your money that those guys are going to get an interview for a head coaching vacancy the next season. And he sees that opportunity, by going out to Denver. It didn't work out so well. The defense was phenomenal, as you could expect, but they just didn't have a quarterback to lead that team. Kind of the same scenario the Pats find themselves in. And so he gets picked back up to be a DC down in Miami. And sure enough, you lose a couple of guys, and this is what happens. I think a lot of it, too, we kind of start talking about bringing in these guys like Jalen Ramsey. Is he a Hall of Famer? Yes, he will be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion, one of these days. But the thing about it is you have to go pay so much money, like you were talking about. Is that risk versus the reward of the backup playing? Is that in the discussion? But also with that discussion comes the culture piece. What does this one person bring to our locker room, to our defense, that's going to change how we play? And I think Jalen brings that type of attitude to the team. He's got the swagger, he's got the cockiness that you're not going to score on him, but he's getting old, and it's funny, he's our age, but, we think that that's getting old, by the terms of playing against, 22 to 26-year-olds nowadays. I mean, he is old. So, I definitely think there's risk versus reward, and then like you lose a big guy like Chubb, right before the offseason starts, or excuse me, postseason. You just open yourself up to vulnerabilities with those high price tag players. Because I mean, even Jalen Ramsey was hurt at the beginning of the season. They didn't have him because of his knee surgery. So, yeah, man, it's a tough balance that I would not want to do as a GM. That's for sure.
Yeah, and for me, you the Fangio statement I think is like undervalued. I know we've talked about it a lot on this podcast that I think that there's guys like Dan Quinn, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's clear, I know it didn't show up against Green Bay, that he knows how to coach a defense. I think
100%.
Fangio knows how to coach a defense. I think there's guys out there that they know how to be either an offensive or defensive coordinator. It's clear that Mike McDaniels knows how to call an offense. However, now when you give them all this responsibility of being a head coach, they struggle. And, it's one of those ones where you really praise Belichick. He really never was, he had a defensive mindset. When something was going wrong, he could go over there and be like, no, do this. Like, he always had that ability to know when to do something at the right time on the defensive side of the football, but he was able to manage all of that organization from draft picks to free agents, cap space. I mean, Bill was a master at like trading like a 4th round pick or something for some guy that came in and you were like, dude, this dude looks like a superstar. Like, Bill had that ability. McDaniels is going to have to show that. Like, don't get me wrong, it's great when you put up 70 points against the Broncos, but as you pointed out, when you blow a 3-game divisional lead, you go into Kansas City and you're only able to score 1 touchdown, people are going to look and be like, yo, dog, what are you doing? Like, it's a big, for me, and the Dolphins have sort of proven that they're real willing to fire a coach. I say McDaniels has to sort of figure it out in the next 2 years or he's gone. Like,
I agree.
And his hopes probably tied with Tua. Like, that's next year could be his final year if the Dolphins don't have a major resurgence. Just my hot take on those guys.
Yeah, and that's
stay with the Dolphins or move on to or go for it.
Yeah, man, that was the last little plug I was going to make. I mean, we've seen this last year. The Dolphins were in the same exact spot. They were on the verge of winning the AFC East and again choked down the stretch. And so that's the thing. You hope that Mike McDaniel learns from that. Do I think he would never have a job again? Absolutely not. I think he would take that step down to being an OC in a heartbeat. But just seeing that swagger that man has and just his awkwardness on the field, like that just brings just a new spark to the game because he's unpredictable, in the way that he calls the offense. And for me, I think he has to show that he can get over that hump. And like you said, he's going to ride on the back of Tua. So it really draws back down to what I said is Tua going to show up? Because he's proven, you take away his first read and now he's got the offensive line problem like you were talking about. You get into his face and he is rattled. And I think it was evident by what we saw in Kansas City. I think it was evident by losing to the Bills. Once he gets that pressure on him because his first read is taken away, he's kind of hosed in a sense, and good teams are going to double Tyreek, or they're going to be like, hey, we'll leave them open, but we're coming with all we got on a, cover 0, and we're going to get to you before you get that ball off. And that's kind of the way you can play Tua in a sense. And it's up to him. And we'll see what he does in this offseason. There's definitely a lot of question marks looming down there with the Dolphins. So with that, yeah, man, we can segue into the Bills. They've got just as much of a headache. I got the list of free agents right here, and it's pretty alarming how many guys, just by the nature of the business, they're going to be able to clean house, as you are about to talk about. So with that, I'll let you get into it.
I mean, you're taking a look. I would have, by that list, offensively, really the only guy, in my opinion, is Gabe Davis. That's a free agent going into this year. The rest of it's that whole defense, which I will be the first to say, let every one of those guys go, because that defense has been, we talked about it last time you were on, that you look at 2021, what cost them the game at Arrowhead when they should have won, you score with 13 seconds left, defense. And then year after year, their defense has continued to be a problem. My biggest piece that I say you got to get rid of, and I understand there's going to be some cap semantics going around it, Von Miller. Like, you signed him to this huge 4-year multi-million-dollar deal, and my man, I think, got paid like I think when we did the quote, it was like $3 million a tackle this year based upon his $15 million that you get paid. He only had like 5 tackles.
Mm-hmm.
I just sit back and I go, the Bills need to figure out their defense. That's priority number 1. Number 25 overall pick in the draft. They're $50 million in the hole, which I just sit back and I'm like, I don't know. That's going to take some work to get out of. For me, the other thing that I sit back and look at the Bills, the ability to go get some wide receivers. Like, I've said it after the game. If I'm the Bills, I get rid of Stephon Diggs. Like, I think Gabe Davis is your home run threat over the top. Stephon, I don't know if you saw it. I think you sent it to us in the chat with Khalil Shakir compared to Stephon Diggs' stat. Diggs had the ball thrown to him, targeted 3 times as much, but they were within, I think, 10 yards of one another in terms of yards. And Shakir had a touchdown in the playoffs. Diggs hasn't done that in the last 3 seasons in the playoffs, have a touchdown. I just sit back and I go, I would not be surprised for them to have some bigger moves like that to go let Stephon go to a team that wants a wide receiver. You can probably pull a 2nd to 3rd round pick for him. Go get someone else. Like, I think the Bills are sort of in this position where you should sort of have a major rebuild because Allen's young. Like, you only get a quarterback like him for so long. You got to figure out how to get that roster managed. What are your thoughts going in for the Bills?
Yeah, so the reference that you were talking about, it was the last 10 Bills games. Receiving yards, Khalil Shakir had 462. Stephon Diggs had 422. Now, the biggest stat, Shakir had 37 targets compared to Diggs' 80. So half the targets and 40 more yards than Stephon Diggs put up. Now, let's get into the money piece. Next year, Stephon Diggs is slated to make $27.8 million. So let's get into that discussion piece. You got a guy out there making $30 million, and in the playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs, arguably the biggest game of the year, just with a little bit of the history, playoff history that comes behind it. The Bills have no problem beating them in the regular season, but for whatever reason, they can't get it done in the offseason. You have Diggs. He had 4 catches. I think it was for 40 yards. It might have been less. I'm not looking at stat line right now, so I apologize. But I do remember he had 11
I'll
targets.
get it for you.
Yeah, so he was 4 for something with 11 targets. And it's just alarming. You get that many passes thrown to you. We obviously talked about the home run shot that was missed. That I believe cost him the game versus Tyler Bass's missed kick. You're the guy who's supposed to go get that. You're making $30 million, and you can't make that play. So with that, you kind of said that's your hot take is that they release him. Go ahead with the stat.
Yeah, he finished 4th in the game for receiving yards, which is funny. He finished behind Khalil Shakir. Khalil had 7 catches for 44 yards. He had 3 catches for 21 yards. And what's even nuts is their backup running back, Latavius Murray, finished in front of him with 3 catches for 27. Their leading receiver was Dalton Kincaid, 5 catches for 45 yards. I sit back and look at that and I go, if you want to be paid number 1 wide receiver money, like Mike Evans showed up. Now, the only thing with Mike Evans, I'm a big proponent of sort of tread with caution with Mike Evans. The only thing I don't like with Mike Evans is he will make a tremendous play. I think Maul pointed this out earlier in the year, and I just never really watched for it. Now that I watch for it, I'm like, dude, he does this every time. When he catches anything, his next play is immediately to the sideline. Like he comes, like he's out. Like I've never seen that with a number 1 wide receiver, but I have to give him credit that when he comes in the game, he'll make a huge play. Like it's this like give and take. I just look at it from like the Jerry Rice, like Jerry would make a play and he was right back in that dude's face the very next play. Like it was like, you can just keep feeding me the ball the whole game. I'm gonna be out here all day. Like I don't need a break. Yep. Like now Jerry there's a reason that he's the greatest wide receiver of all time, and it's not close. I know people are going to argue Randy Moss, but Jerry's stats prove that Jerry was. If Randy Moss had Jerry Rice's work ethic, then Randy would have been number one. I know that's a
100%.
side note for a later day, but Stephon Diggs, you want to get paid $30 million? You got 3 catches.
Yeah.
Like, and like you said, do you drop the, in my opinion, same as yours, the game winner? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if he scores, but I think that the momentum, all of these different, it just changes the game. Like, it's sort of like we believe we're gonna win this. Like, we hit this. Like, it's our time. He drops that, and you could just feel the life out of that stadium. Just be like, dude, we're gonna lose this again. Like that. That to me is the Bills right now, that they are in. I mean, it's their franchise history. 4 straight Super Bowl losses. It's the Bills have constantly been in this position of, I don't think that we're going to win this game. At no point have I feel like they came in going, we're winning this. Like, you, and I hate to say it because I think most guys are. There's only a few out there that I find don't have that diva component. But for as much drama as Diggs causes, I look at last year when he's just thrown a fit to Josh Allen against Cincinnati in that playoff game. Going into this offseason, a lot of people had said he requested a trade, and then he dropped that catch. Dude, go find somewhere else. Like, Maul points to it with the quarterbacks that if you don't have any questions, the last thing that you want to do is pay this dude. They've already paid him. I think that he's still good enough that some team will happily take on his contract. There's plenty of teams out there that want a guy like that, and it may be unpopular in Buffalo, but I think for the betterment of Buffalo and for Josh Allen and for future success, move on from him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We've kind of already talked about it. Looking at that catch that he missed against the Chiefs, I think momentum would have been the only thing that would have taken him down to the ground because, I mean, his defender was already on the turf. So, he missed that opportunity there. But the biggest thing with keeping him on the team, they have no ability to throw any money towards Gabe Davis. And that's the problem is that looking forward, they're going to have Stephon Diggs, and they're going to replace wide receiver number 2 with a guy who, maybe they pick somebody up in the draft, or they're able to get somebody on a rookie deal, or maybe a practice squad. Who knows to say? But they're going to have a hole because they're not going to be able to pay Gabe Davis what he's worth. And I think Gabe Davis is worth that money. I think, some of the turmoil may be Stephon Diggs realizing, hey, Gabe Davis is now wide receiver number 1 on this team, and it's showing. I mean, the numbers don't lie, the play doesn't lie, and we've had this drama that wide receivers, God bless their souls, but they always the ones who blow up the quickest always seem to be the ones that have the issue the fastest when they're not getting the ball. I mean, you could see, body languages from Jamar Chase, from Justin Jefferson, obviously Stephon Diggs. Like it's been a huge conversation piece, for the last, I would say, 2 seasons. Is Diggs still the guy in Buffalo? Is there a rift between him and Josh Allen? And they got to do the silly press conferences like, yeah, there's nothing wrong. We're still playing video games every night together. Like that stuff's unnecessary because we know that there's tension. We see the tension, and they're just like, well, we're just both competitors. Yeah, and you guys are competing against one another instead of the other team. So I agree with your take. I don't think it happens, but I do think they should move on from Stephon Diggs. And then some of the other guys
Yeah,
that I was going to go, some of the other guys that they're getting rid of or that they have big question marks. You got safety Micah Hyde. He's a guy that needs, Sherfield, the one catching the home run off the helmet. Latavius Murray out of the backfield. So they've got some guys, Damian Harris, another running back that kind of stepped in a little bit. They've got some question marks here that they need to really understand if they're going to bring these guys back. Shaq Lawson, another name. on that line, as well as Leonard Floyd. They're going to be a team that's going to be in a lot of trouble if they don't start moving money around.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts that we sort of talked about the Patriots' inability to compete in the division. I mean, I look at it through the lens of if you give me a healthy roster for all these guys and just who has the least holes to fill, I'm still of the opinion it's the Jets next season that have the best ability with Rodgers being healthy. Like, they're just a few pieces on the offensive line and maybe a trade for Devontae or just someone else that they're filling a hole. Like, they're not looking like you talked about. I mean, the Bills have a tremendous amount of guys that they're just not going to be able to pay. So you look at it from that standpoint. I still think they have Josh Allen. He's great. How well does the Patriots quarterback situation play out in the offseason? Who knows? The Dolphins, I just find that, we both said, until Tua can prove that I'm that guy, I am the Marino of the Dolphins that can win these games, you have a lot of questions. I think it's the Jets' division next year to win. It's more of, in my opinion, the Dolphins to sort of lose.
Mm-hmm.
The Bills and the Pats, I think the Pats sort of know their bottom feeders. If they surprise some teams, they surprise some teams. But I can definitely see the Bills having a major regression from this year. I think a lot of people sort of knew it was sort of their last year of being real competitive, at least this coming season, just because of the holes they have to fill. It's sort of nuts. But you're definitely going to see a pretty good seismic shift in the AFC East next season.
Yeah, and I think you were starting to allude it there, and I mentioned it in our last episode we did when we discussed the divisional round. But we've had the talks earlier in the season was, hey, is the Bills' door closed for the Super Bowl? And, I think we both collectively say yes. And I think this offseason will prove, that to be true. That, it shows how maybe good of a coach maybe McDermott is for putting on a run for the last half of the season. Being able to save his job, because if you remember, halfway through the season, he's kind of on the hot seat because, hey, these guys are 500 and they shouldn't be. Type of conversation. But now it's, do they even finish 500? With the guys that they're going to have next season.
Oh, it's going to be tough. The AFC's like at the end of the day, Harbaugh's coming in San Diego. San Diego's going to be a better football team. They have Herbert. We're going to get to those guys here once. Yeah, sorry. I'll always be San Diego in my heart.
Yeah.
I just sit back and I look at it and I go, the AFC is going to get better. The players, the teams, the AFC will be fine. You still have to get through Mahomes. Lamar's looking great. We'll see what happens. I know this episode's going to be released after the Super Bowl, but, we don't know who's going to win it yet. But one of those two teams, they're not going away. They still have their quarterback. They'll be fine. The good news for the Bills, they have their answer in Allen. It's just a matter of how long does it take for you to reassemble a roster to get them into a position where they're competing. That's going to be tough. Taking a look at the next episode, we're going to talk about the NFC East. So that's sort of how you can sort of expect us to go. Is we'll go AFC East this week, NFC East next week, and then we're going to pick the opposite, of the divisions. We'll always talk about someone that has no playoff contention. So you can expect us to not touch until the NFC North's bounced or other teams are bounced. We're not going to talk about them that way, that we can have some, fidelity of what's going on. The other thing that we want to know a little bit more of before we get into the NFC East, not that I don't think it's going to matter of who's going to be their head coach. I think the Commanders are sort of in the position of the Pats that whatever happens, it's Commander fans be ready for still another probably 3 to 5 years of just being like, yo, dog, this is rough. Like, they got a lot of problems.
Yeah, and I kind of look at the Commanders. I'm surprised we haven't heard. I heard a little bit of grumblings, that Belichick was in talks with the Commanders, but we have not seen anything official saying that he actually has been interviewing for that position. It seems like, since the Falcons said no, it seems that, Bill might be out of a job this year.
I don't think Bill coaches this year. I think so. The Commanders went out and got the GM who was a part of the NBA with the Warriors in
Mm-hmm.
terms of assembling their roster, which he's done a really, you got to give him props. He's done a really good job in the NBA. Coming to the NFL, he's going to have to be able to, that's a big adjustment. Like, I can't emphasize that enough, but like, it will be impressive if he's able to manage that transition of different sports. I think he'll know the analytics and numbers and different things like that. It will be impressive. The good thing for the Commanders is you got rid of your terrible owner. So just having the owner gone will
Yeah.
prove instrumental. I guess we can give, you know, any thoughts before we go into the NFC East here in the next episode. For me, the biggest question is I think you could sum it up for all these teams. Two of these teams have yet to go, as we talked about last episode, to an NFC championship
Yeah.
this century. In the Commanders and the Cowboys, like, it's getting over the hump. Like, the Eagles and the Cowboys, for as good as those teams looked, terrible postseason performances. I mean, just got shellacked in both games. And then you look at the Giants and the Commanders, and it's like, we've been good. We had good teams. Like, we had Eli, and then for the Commanders, you have to go all the way back to Joe Gibbs and the Redskin days for them to say we had a good team. I think all these teams have had the ability to be good football teams. It's just a matter of, like, can you start to figure it out and regain that form that you're capable of?
Yeah, and they started. The Commanders were able to get blown out by Tom Brady. In the wild card round just a couple of years ago, mainly because of their defense, and they've already sold that defense away. So there are a lot of questions. I think Eric being the enemy, being there, I don't know why they just haven't already said, "Hey, we've talked to him about taking over as head coach." It's quite an interesting situation, especially for the coverage that being enemy has gotten the last couple of years of, hey, this guy coached Mahomes. He had the greatest offense, in the league. Why is he not being looked at in a head coaching position? Like, I don't know. Maybe there's something in the background that nobody ever knew about, or it just doesn't make sense to me that there hasn't at least been talk that they're looking at him to be the next head coach of that team.
The thing I've heard more about Eric than anything else is that he rubs players the wrong way
Hmm.
with just, a big gets onto him, which it's sad the fact that you have an NFL coach and you got guys that are being paid millions of dollars to do their job, and when they get called on not doing their job, they're just like, well, coach didn't speak to me the way I want it to be spoken to. And it's like, well, dude, you're not doing your job. Like, I'm he came from an organization that was winning Super Bowls to now go into an organization that was playing pretty terrible. But
Mm-hmm.
that'll be for next episode with the NFC East. Anything else you want to tie on with the AFC East before we shut it down for the up until the draft?
Yeah, man. A lot of question marks still with the Eagles. They just picked up Vic Fangio, so pretty curious to see how that works out because it's kind of the inverse of what happened to the Bears. The Bears had Fangio, then went to Sean Desai. Well, this year the Eagles had Sean Desai, and now they're moving to Vic Fangio. So a lot of question marks to see if he can revamp that defense to who they were just one season ago. Obviously the Cowboys, McCarthy staying on for another season. How do we see, him being as good as he is with 3 12-5 seasons? Can they finally make that, make it count when it matters? And then obviously Daboll, I give him one more season before he's fired. There's a lot of things that I think the NFC East, we've always kind of alluded to the last, I would say, besides the 1 year that the Commanders did actually win the division. I think that was 2020, 2021, just a couple of years ago when Brady went to the Super Bowl. But like just the questions we have of, is will the Giants and Commanders ever be able to reshape their organizations to be able to compete again against the Eagles and Cowboys, or if the Eagles and Cowboys are just going to run it, for the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of questions for sure. I think Giants paying Danny Dimes all that money, and we've seen how that worked out. There's definitely a lot of mistakes made by those organizations, but I think the Commanders are trying to move in the right direction. We'll see, if Magic Johnson puts any words behind his tweets, and actually tries to revamp the team or just talks crap on them on X. So we'll see, man. Look forward to doing that next episode.
Sounds good. Well, thanks to you guys for tuning in. Go to our Instagram, TikTok, follow us, and subscribe on there. YouTube, Apple, and Spotify for our podcast. Website, footballtalksquadron.com. Thanks for tuning in. Time Pull Chalks. We'll see you next time.